It's been a couple of days since my last video covering the revealed cards, and that's because I was waiting for the next champion to come out. So hooray, Shyvana was finally revealed today. She's one of the champions that I was excited about because I wanted the dragon archetype to get more support. And we're going to just dive right into all of the reveals from the past 3 days, starting with this graphic that I'm putting up. Again, shout out to my buddy Cosmic who makes these. And let's take a look at the stuff revealed from 3 days ago real quick. First up is Patched Porobot. This is a 2-cost 2/3 Poro in Piltover and Zaun, and it says, while in hand I have a random keyword, and it changes each round. When I'm summoned, grant me this keyword. For Poro dedicated decks, this is pretty lackluster, in large part because it belongs to Piltover and Zaun, and that's just not usually one of the regions that you include when you want to go for a dedicated Poro deck. That being said, in Expeditions, this has the potential to be okay. Even more so, it has some potential to potentially high roll, because if you play this on curve and it becomes like a 2/3 2-cost elusive unit, that's not half bad. But for the most part, this is a pretty vanilla unit and it doesn't do a ton to help the Poro archetype by itself. Next up is a card that, of course, people hated, and I saw a lot of chatter about it when it was revealed, and that's just because people do not like their spells being countered. But this is Nopify. This is a 2-cost fast spell in Ionia, and it says stop a fast or slow spell that costs 3 or less. So not quite deny levels of power, because you have to stop something cheap. Also lacks denies flexibility, because it only stops spells. This does not stop skills the way that deny does, but you do get that potential benefit of the cost ratio where you spend 2 and you stop anything 3 or less. I think this ultimately might be included in some lists as a tech card. I don't think it's, an auto 3 of in any list, at least right now. But as a 1 or a 2 of, I think it's got some merit, mostly just to make your opponent be forced to play around it. So I like it in that regard, and I think it will definitely see play. Next up, we have Trevor Snoozebottom. This is a 3-cost Ionia unit, and it is a 0/3. But it says support, create an attacking Mumble Sprite with my supported allies' stats. Now, a Mumble Sprite is a 3-cost 1/1 that has elusive, but also has ephemeral. Now, because it is created with the supported ally stats, you can do some cheeky things with this. At first, I was very not excited, very low on Trevor's value, but I think that there is at least meme potential. I don't know if Trevor's going to make it in competitive decks. Scratch that. He's not going to be played in competitive decks. But if you really want to meme it up, you could play Trevor with a deck full of fatties. And then you could also, because he's in Ionia, use him with, any of your Ionia tools that remove ephemeral from a unit. Specifically, I'm thinking the Zed spell where you remove it from your own unit, grant it to something else, and then you are going to keep your Mumble Sprite with elusive and the big stats. So, it's a source of that combo, but let's be honest here. Paying 3 for a 0/3 that only helps you temporarily on offense is just not great. So, meme potential pretty high, competitive potential pretty low. And then the last card, at least from this batch, was the University of Piltover, and this raised some eyebrows, and I saw a lot of comparisons to Hearthstone. University of Piltover is a 5-cost landmark in Piltover and Zaun, and it says on round start, discard your hand, create 3 random cards in hand, and grant them fleeting. So in other words, at the start of each turn, you are going to get 3 random cards to work with, but you also discard your hand. Now, I assume that they don't want this to really make your hand be 4 cards big. So this idea of, how do I want to put this? This idea of like getting 4 cards and still being able to use the stuff in your deck while using this, I think is incorrect. We won't know for sure, but I suspect that this is going to work by you would draw your card, but then you discard your hand and you only get to play with the 3 random cards. And if that's the case, this is actually potentially useful in Jinx decks, because when you hit 0 cards in hand, you automatically trigger getting her rocket, and that's why things like the augmented experimenter, I believe is what it's called, but the 6-cost card where you discard your hand and draw 3 cards, that works with Jinx, even though you end up with 3 cards in the end, because you discarded your hand in the process, you trigger her rocket. So this card, as much as I'd love to say, you know, hey, this will not have, you know, any sort of competitive viability, you don't have to worry about the randomness that this is going to bring, you don't have to pull your hair out, the reality is that I can actually see this card being played in Jinx decks, because this is a very easy way, and an on curve way really, because if you drop your Jinx on 4, you play this on 5, the turn you play it, you take a bump, you're not really doing anything, but then after that you're just playing protect your Jinx. If you can keep your Jinx alive, you are going to be making a rocket every turn and maybe doing more, but a rocket every turn is already pretty attractive. So I can absolutely see this card seeing some play, as sad as that makes me. But that was it from a couple of days ago, so now we're going to change graphics to look at the stuff revealed yesterday. And right out of the gate we get some more dragon support, and that is fantastic to hear, because as I said, Shyvana has been revealed today, and that's going to be in the last batch. But we have Egghead Researcher. This is a 2-cost 1/3 in Demacia, and he says, when I'm summoned, create a random dragon follower in hand. So not great stat line, but you get to replace the unit, you get to replace the card. It's you know, 1/3 body for the early game to kind of help be a speed bump until you can get your dragons online. Most of your dragons are a bit more mid-rangey or late game oriented, so being able to survive long enough to start getting your dragon value makes sense. This guy is good for that, so there's a strong chance this will see some play at least, or at least be experimented with in dragon dedicated decks. Next up we have Dragon Guard Lieutenant. This is a 2-cost 3/2, and it says, when I'm summoned, if you behold a dragon, grant me Challenger. This card will be played in dragon decks. If you're playing a Shyvana deck, this card is amazing for an early game unit. This is your Fleet Feather Tracker. You're gonna basically just keep getting a 3/2 Challenger, and that helps you secure the early game, and that's great. Next up we have Stony Suppressor. This is a 2-cost 1/3, and it says all spells cost 1 more. And this is interesting because it's not an aggressive stat line, but it is some disruption for spells. That's not something that Demacia really had in their toolkit. I like it from a flavor standpoint. That being said, there is certainly some immediate concern I have, you know, being somebody who comes from Magic or coming from the Elder Scrolls Legends and thinking about like Withered Hand Cultist, things like that. I get a little nervous, but this obviously does not have like Withered Hand Cultist stat lines or anything like that, so I think this is more reasonable. Whether or not this sees play, I think will just depend on the meta. Like if for whatever reason, let's just say hypothetically Ezreal makes a massive comeback in the meta, then I could see this seeing play. Or, you know, if Heimerdinger starts reigning supreme once again, this could be a card that you might consider deploying. Even then, it's not like a guarantee, but this is interesting. I just like that this card exists because it kind of makes you second guess your tech choices and deck building options. Next up, I want to cover Sharp Sight. This is a 2-cost burst spell in Demacia, and it says give an ally +2/+2, and I can block units with elusive this round. If elusive units start making a comeback and elusive dedicated decks start making a comeback, this will absolutely see play. Honestly, even just the +2/+2 for 2 at burst speed is not terrible, and the elusive part might even just be like a, you know, accidental benefit. So I could see this squeaking its way into some decks. It's certainly going to be meta dependent in terms of its popularity, but I like this card. Next up, we have Scorched Earth, which is a Noxus card, and this is a 3-cost fast spell. You kill a damaged unit or destroy a landmark. So I suspect This will, in most cases, just replace Noxian Guillotine. Most cases. You know, there's some fringe cases where maybe you want the extra spellcast or whatever, but any decks that we're running, like that one copy of Guillotine, are probably going to switch to this. You might even see this more often, like more than Guillotine, because of its flexibility, the ability to kill a unit or destroy a landmark. It's not quite Edict of Azura power levels from the Elder Scrolls Legends, but this is the closest to that I've seen, and this is this is flexible enough. So the fact that like this and some of the other landmark removal cards exist and at the cost they exist at makes me feel like most landmarks aren't going to see a ton of play, or even if they do see play, they might not get a ton of value, because there's some pretty efficient ways to kill landmarks overall across many regions. This card is flexible enough to consider including in at least some lists. So next up we have Stalking Broodmother. This is a 7-cost dragon with a 6/6 body, and it says it has Fury, which is all right. We've got plenty of dragons with that, but also Scout. So a 6/6 scouting furious dragon is interesting. Whether or not this is good enough to make the cut in dragon dedicated decks, I don't know, because there's already some really good dragons that exist, and even more that we have not yet covered that were revealed today. But this certainly will find a home, I think, in expeditions and things like that. The fact that, you know, we have cards like Egghead Researcher that can create this also makes it relevant as far as that goes. But I don't foresee this finding a home in your constructed list, but you will potentially run into it, you know, whether it's expeditions or through Egghead Researcher. Now, the last card that was revealed in yesterday's bunch was the Noxcria Arena. This is the Noxus landmark. It is a 5-cost landmark, and it says on round end, your strongest ally and the weakest enemy strike each other. And that's interesting. This is actually a pretty cool tool for control decks that are Noxus oriented, and I look forward to seeing what you can combine this with in terms of just cool combos. Potentially using Arena and Fiora, for example, so that you can maybe get 2 triggers from her the turn she comes down, or other cards that say strike, or, you know, cards with Fury, for example. This is a great card for potentially ramping up their stats while also removing some opposing bodies. I don't know if this is good enough to see a ton of play competitively, but I like what it's trying to do. The only reason I question its competitive viability is simply because it costs 5, and I've seen a lot of very efficient removal. But the one thing, I will say this, the one thing this has over most landmarks is this is a round end trigger, not a round start trigger. So if your opponent empties their mana, or you're in one of those situations where you have the opening, you can play this and at least get 1 turn's worth of value, like right then at the end of the turn, and you're going to know exactly how it's going to work out, how it's going to resolve. So again, I like it. It makes me at least consider deck building possibilities, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a design win. Whenever I see a card and I'm like, oh, okay, if I was going to build a deck, what would I include with that? How do I, you know, play with this, blah blah blah. Like, that's a design win, but I question whether it'll be good enough to see widespread competitive play. My instincts are currently saying no. I think that it's just too expensive, and if you're playing Noxus, I mean, like right now, there's just not a lot of reason to play Noxus control decks, and if you're playing Noxus aggro, you don't want this to be a thing. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I'm not sold quite yet. And now we get to move on and to talk about the Shyvana reveal and the cards that came with her today. So right out of the gate, we have Shyvana. Shyvana is a 4-cost 3/4 Demacian champion, has the dragon tag, and says, attack, give me +1/+1 this round. So just on that alone, not a lot to write home about. Like, let's be honest, a 4-cost 3/4 with no relevant keywords. Yes, it has the dragon tag, but we're not talking about having fury or elusive or tough or anything like that. So no relevant keywords. And it only gets +1/+1 when it attacks, is ho-hum at best. She levels up when she has seen dragon allies deal 12+ damage. That feels like a lot, but the reality is if you are playing dragons on curve from her through the next couple of turns, right? So 4, 5, and 6, as long as she survives, you're likely going to be leveling her probably around turn 6. Now, when she levels up, she becomes far more impressive. She gets that standard +1/+1 bump, so she becomes a 4-cost 4/5 dragon, but she has fury now, and her attack changes to give me +2/+2 this round and create a fleeting Strafing Strike in hand. Now, Strafing Strike is another spell that was revealed. We'll cover that one in just a moment. But the last thing I want to mention is her champion spell is called Confront. So duplicates of Shyvana become Shyvana's Confront. This is a 3-cost burst spell that grants an ally challenger. I don't think Confront is good enough to really see a lot of main deck play by itself. So this is probably only going to be relevant when Shyvana's on the board and you draw a second copy. But it is a consistent source of challenger. So there is that. So Strafing Strikes. This is the card that she makes a fleeting copy of, but it's also a regular card. Now, Strafing Strike here says it's a 3-cost fast spell, and an ally and an enemy strike each other. Then, if the ally is a dragon, heal it 2. So this is single combat, but if it's played on a dragon, you get some healing and it costs 1 more. But it's interesting because if you really want to go overboard, you can just run a ton of dragons, and then you could also still run single combat and Strafing Strikes in the same deck. Or, again, it's going to sound really weird, but if you just wanted to go overboard on something like a Fiora deck, you could run single combat and Strafing Strike, and just who cares about the healing part? It's interesting that this card exists the way that it does. With that being said, this is a great card for helping you level up Shyvana, because you can attack with her, get that damage in, and then if you use Strafing Strike on something small, you're going to get extra damage yet again towards leveling her up, and then you're going to get the heal. So this is a removal card, and big shock here, right? This is Demacia as a region. Demacia cares about combat, so they make things fight each other. Demacia is traditionally very mid-rangey. I think dragons are going to be just that, with Shyvana kind of being the start of your mid-range curve. So you might do some stuff in the early game, but really, if you're playing Demacian dragons, you're trying to, in all likelihood, go like 4 play a dragon, obviously Shyvana, 5 play a dragon, 6 play a dragon, she levels up, and then at that point, because she's leveled, you start pressuring, and then there are some late game bombs you have. So speaking of late game bombs, Cadrigrin the Infernal is a 9-cost dragon. It's a 9/6 body with fury, but it says when I'm summoned, grant other dragon allies everywhere +2/+2. Now that says grant, so it's permanent and it's everywhere. So all the dragons that you've gotten, whether it's from, random creation or in your deck or even on the board, they get +2/+2. So your likely already meaty dragons get even beefier when this thing comes down. It's when I'm summoned. So if you find ways to bring this into play without necessarily playing it directly, those summon triggers still count. So I'm immediately thinking of like Demacian War Mother dragons, because if you War Mother out a Cadrigrin, it's still going to buff all of your other dragons. It's just an interesting thing to consider. Not necessarily the best way to build dragons, but it's there. So just fun. Now this, again, it's meant to be a finisher. It's meant to help you kind of snowball that late game, because this is likely going to be a pretty mid-range, but like late mid-range kind of archetype, and you need something to get you over the hump, and this is the card that's supposed to help you get there. There is another dragon that was revealed. This is Eclipse Dragon. This is a 7-cost 7/5, but this is out of Targon, not Demacia. And now this 7/5 has Fury, and it has both Daybreak and Nightfall, which I love, hence the Eclipse Dragon. Love the flavor here. The Daybreak Trigger is the next dragon or celestial unit you play costs 2 less. So this is ramp potentially for Aurelian Soul, because this is in Targon already, and this is potentially ramp for your other dragons. It's just great. Now the Nightfall trigger is create a random dragon follower and celestial follower in hand. So the Nightfall trigger is you get a 7/5 Fury and you basically draw 2 cards. Now they're random cards, but you get 2 extra cards out of it. Now, when you really want to go bonkers, if you're playing this in a Daybreak deck and you've got the guy that basically says it's always Daybreak for us, I'm pretty sure that if you play a card and then play this, you'll trigger both the Daybreak because it's always day and the Nightfall because you've played another card, and then it's just bonkers value. So I like this card. I like the flexibility because you can say, you know, do I need to play the resource game or do I want to speed up my game plan? So against other control decks, you likely want to go with the Daybreak option because you're not going to run out of cards in a control mirror very often anyway. And you want to be the one who plays, you know, your big bomb first. You want to get that Aurelian Soul on the board, let's say. And against other decks, or maybe in that control mirror, you really have just ground out this weird war of attrition. You both only have a couple of cards in your hand, and then you pop this Nightfall, and suddenly you are refilling your hand with Nightfall cards and Celestials and Lions and Tigers and Bears. Oh my. So I just really like the flexibility of this card. I think this will find a home because of the flexibility, whether it's in Dragon dedicated decks or in Aurelian Soul decks, because even before this card existed, really your game plan with Aurelian Soul was to ramp as fast as you could, and this just helps even further. So I'm a fan. So the last card was Dragon Guard Lookout. This is a 6-cost 3/5 follower in Demacia, and it says when I'm summoned, if you behold a dragon, rally. I think that in Dragon dedicated decks, you could maybe see this as like a one of, but the fact that it costs 6 and you only get a 3/5 body with no relevant keywords doesn't make it super attractive to me. As far as like running multiples, most of the time you're going to be saying to yourself, do I want to run this or do I want to run Relentless Pursuit? And because of the cheaper cost of Relentless Pursuit, I obviously have more flexibility. And by going this route, again, does the 3/5 body with no keywords really matter? Does it make it that much better? The answer is probably no. So I think this is a great card in expeditions if you're going down the dragon path there, but I don't think this ends up finding a home in constructed play simply because there are just more flexible options available. And that's it for the cards revealed. I really like Shyvana. She's not really your game winner. She reminds me more of a support champion, very similar to Diana with Nightfall, but I love all the additional dragon support. I'm dying to see the entirety of the set and build some dragon decks because who doesn't love dragons? So if you made it this far anyway, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. We are just a couple of days away from this next expansion, which is always the most exciting time for a game. I'll see you all then.